In the stillness that follows the end of love, the silence can feel overwhelmingly loud. This is Daniel's reality now, a space that was once vibrant with laughter and shared hopes, now overshadowed by the quiet of an empty apartment. He had known love, genuine, profound love, but now, that same space is filled with endless questions. Where did it all go wrong? Was he truly enough? And how does one heal when the past refuses to release its grip? His journey is just beginning, one of rediscovery, of learning to offer himself the same kindness he once so effortlessly gave to others. The road ahead may not be easy, but within the quiet spaces left by fading memories, there is room to grow, to embrace self-compassion, and to heal. Daniel had always been a man who prided himself on his independence. He had faced difficult times before, job stress, family struggles, but nothing quite like this. After the breakup, he felt a hollowness inside, a void where there had once been love. His apartment, once filled with the laughter of shared meals, quiet conversations, and comforting routine, had now turned into a silent museum of a life that no longer existed. The walls that had once felt like home now felt foreign. Every corner of the room seemed to remind him of her. The mugs they used to drink from, now gathering dust on the shelf. The half-read books that they had started together, now abandoned. The soft indentations on the couch where she used to sit. The silence in the apartment was deafening, and no matter how hard he tried to fill it with activities, distractions, or even noise, it always returned. Daniel had tried to move on. He filled his days with work, with exercise, with trying to stay busy. He forced himself to attend social gatherings with friends, but nothing felt quite right. It was as though he was walking through life like a shadow, disconnected, numb. In those quiet moments, when he was left alone, his mind would replay their memories like a broken record. The laughter, the shared moments of joy, the comfort they had brought each other. And then, the questions would begin. What went wrong? Why did it end? Was he not enough? Was he not the person she needed? But what hurt even more was the ache in his chest that he couldn't explain to anyone. It wasn't just about the end of a relationship, it was the sense of losing a part of himself, the person he had been when they were together. Who was he now, without her by his side? One evening, after yet another day of pushing through the pain, Daniel found himself sitting across from his therapist. The weight of the past few months was etched on his face. His shoulders slumped, his eyes tired and distant. His therapist, who had seen him struggle in silence, watched him for a moment before speaking gently. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady yet kind, "I know this is hard. I know it feels like there's no way out of this pain, but I want to offer you something. Something simple, yet powerful." Daniel looked at her curiously, unsure what to expect. She smiled warmly, inviting him into the next part of his healing. "I want you to try an exercise. It may feel strange at first, but just trust me. When you get home tonight, set an empty chair in front of you. Sit across from it, and imagine that your best friend is sitting there. And then, tell them everything you're feeling. Your sadness, your frustration, your anger, and even your fear. Let it all out. Don't hold anything back." Daniel stared at her, skeptical. The idea of talking to an empty chair seemed absurd. What was the point? How could that help him move on, when everything felt so shattered? Yet, something in her tone told him to at least try. Maybe it was the desperation for relief, maybe it was the quiet plea for change. He agreed, though with little faith that it would work. "Okay," he said quietly, "I'll give it a try." That night, Daniel walked into his apartment, and for the first time in weeks, something felt different. The familiar hum of silence still filled the space, but tonight, he was going to face it. He set up the empty chair, positioned just across from where he usually sat, and looked at it. The room felt strangely quiet now, as if the chair was waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to confront the emotions he had locked away. That he sat down slowly, unsure of how to begin. The chair stared back at him, empty, unjudging. For a long moment, he did nothing but stare at it, lost in thought. His chest tightened, and the familiar wave of grief washed over him. It felt foolish, but at the same time, he was so tired of carrying this weight alone. He took a deep breath, cleared his throat, and began. "I feel broken," Daniel said softly, almost too quietly to hear. But he said it. The words slipped out like they had been waiting for him to let them go. "I feel like I'm not enough, like I wasn't good enough for her. Maybe I wasn't the person she needed. Maybe I failed." He stopped there, his throat tightening. The words felt heavy on his tongue. But they also felt like a release, like the first time in months that he could say it out loud. He had carried these thoughts in silence, each one sharp and heavy, weighing him down with guilt. For a moment, the room was silent. The chair was still empty. And yet, Daniel found himself breathing a little easier. He had said it. He had let those feelings out. But there was something more. The emptiness of the chair seemed to fill with a different kind of energy. It wasn't just a void now. It felt like it was waiting for something else. "Now, imagine you're your best friend," his therapist's words came back to him. What would you say to yourself? What would you say to someone you care about who's hurting like you are? Daniel felt a tremor of uncertainty, but he moved to the empty chair, slowly and deliberately. He sank into it and stared at the place where he had been moments before. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it was simply still. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine what a friend would say to him. It was hard at first, as though he wasn't sure he could offer himself the same kindness he had offered to others, but then, softly, the words began to come. "You're hurting, and that's okay," he said to himself, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You're allowed to feel this. It's okay to be broken right now. You don't need to have all the answers. You're not failing, you're just healing." The words surprised him. They were kinder than anything he had said to himself in months. They didn't feel fake or patronizing, they felt true. And as he sat there, a strange sense of relief washed over him. He had never spoken to himself this way before. He had always been harsh, quick to judge, quick to push himself through the pain. But tonight, he had given himself permission to feel. To be imperfect. To simply be human. Tears started to well in his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't try to hold them back. He let them fall. He cried for the loss. He cried for the love that was no longer there. And for the first time in a long time, he cried for himself. He had spent so long trying to be strong, to avoid the pain, but now, in this quiet moment, he allowed himself to break. The empty chair, once a symbol of loss, had transformed. It was no longer a reminder of what was missing. It was a reminder that he was still here. That even in the silence, he wasn't truly alone. He had himself. He could be his own friend, his own comfort. That I and the weeks that followed, Daniel made it a point to practice self-compassion every day. When the waves of self-doubt and sadness came, he would sit before the empty chair and ask, "What would I say to a friend?" He learned to be gentler with himself, to accept that healing takes time. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a step in the right direction. Slowly, the ache in his chest began to ease. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through his window, Daniel woke up with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in months. His apartment still felt like it was his, but the silence no longer weighed him down. He walked to the window and stared out, watching the world begin anew. The chair still stood in the center of the room, a quiet symbol of all he had learned. That he walked toward it, paused, and placed his hand gently on its back. "Thank you," he whispered to the chair, to himself. "I'm learning," and with that, Daniel felt a quiet peace fill the space in his heart that had once been overwhelmed by grief. He wasn't fixed. He wasn't perfect. But he was healing. Slowly, steadily, he was finding his way back to himself. And that was enough.